Welcome back, folks. We're still playing with sines and cosines. We're going to do this a lot. If you're with me next semester, you're going to do it then too. To make the world go round. That's a phaser pun. I'm sorry. I had to. Anyhow, they're common. They're so common because of our guy Fourier, who figured out that he can break down any periodic signal into a bunch of sines and cosines. Now, when we do phasor analysis for a circuit, we're going to use cosines by convention and not sines. But part of that signal is still a sine wave. Fourier didn't get rid of that altogether. Part of it's still a sine wave. So we have to figure out how to deal with that. And how do we take a sine and move it to the phasor domain? And the way we do that is we make it look like a cosine, or vice versa. We've got to rewrite that sine as a cosine. So here's the game we're going to play today. How do we make a cosine into a sine? Okay, because I want to rewrite all of my sines as cosines. So I got to figure out how to take that cosine and get an equivalent sine wave. So I've plotted a few here. These are nice and simple. Cosine starts at 1, sine starts at 0. Hopefully you know and love these by now. And the way we make this blue cosine look like the red sine is we shift it. Okay, so the answer to that is we shift it. I plotted these in MATLAB. Right now, the two lines of code that set up these functions look like this. Okay, I'm not asking you to go do the MATLAB or anything like that, but here's our two lines. V1 is our cosine, so that looks like that one's in blue. So let's make a little legend over here. That one's in blue. And then our sine is the dotted red one. So there's our sine. Okay, I want to make the equivalent of V2 using V1 simply by shifting it. So if I want to move this peak to this peak, the easiest way to do that is to shift to the right. Okay, and we have to ask ourselves, how much are we shifting to the right by? So we could look at it as a time shift. It looks like it's a little bit above 2, a little bit 0.2, a little bit below 0.3, somewhere in there. But we can also think of this on our phasor diagram, and I think it's going to help us find this shift a lot easier, that theta. Okay, so let's draw these on a phasor diagram, and let's make sure we get them right and keep our colors consistent. So the cosine starts at 1, and that 1 is going to be along the real axis. Okay, so it's going to be sticking out here, and that's our cosine. It's going to start at a value of 1, and as it spins counterclockwise, it's going to get closer to 0. Then it's going to come down here and be a -1, head back towards 0, and then finish off one period at +1 again. And I think that's what we see nicely here with our plot. It starts at 1, it heads towards 0, -1, back to 0, and then finishes off one rotation at +1. Okay, does the same thing in the second rotation. The sine plays a similar game, but it starts at 0, and then it heads to 1. Okay, so if it starts at 0, it's either going to be pointing up along the imaginary axis or down. It turns out it's going to be pointing down, right? So I'm going to try to dot it this way. Give yourself an arrowhead, maybe not a very pretty arrowhead, but there it is. And as it spins counterclockwise, it's going to be starting at 0, headed towards 1, back to 0, down to -1, and finishing its rotation at 0. And I think we see that on the time domain plot as well. It starts at 0, it heads towards 1, back to 0, -1, finishes at 0, and then it repeats itself. Okay, so I think the blue, I'm pretty comfortable that we got the blue is our cosine. The blue is our cosine, and the red is our sine. Okay, so we want to rewrite V2, and we want to rewrite V2 as a cosine so that that cosine behaves like the sine. And all we need to do for that is to shift it by -90 degrees. Shifted -90 degrees. Okay, so I could just as easily write V2. Let's grab this one. Right, I could write V2, and let's do it. I'll get it to plot in green. Maybe I'll take a brief intermission to do that. Right. V3 is going to be cosine 2 pi. Oh, I don't need to spell out pi. I have a pen. 2 pi t minus 90 degrees. Or I'm going to, you know what? I'm going to do it in radians, because MATLAB wants it in radians. So it's going to be pi, negative pi over 2. Okay, and that shift is going to cause these two things to be on top of each other. That's what we're going for here. All I have to do is shift the blue line to the right by 90 degrees, and I have a sine. Okay, so let me pause and make MATLAB do that for you, and I'll come back with a brand new plot. Okay, so I did that, updated the code just a skosh. Let's put it over there so it's not behind me. And I'm hoping you can see that the green solid line that I plopped in there is behind the red, and they end up being line on line. Okay, so blue is our original cosine, green is the cosine that's been shifted by 90 degrees, and red is the sine. So let me grab some code for you just so that it's not magic, it's MATLAB. And let me get my preview back so I can see where I'm pasting it. Okay, so there it is. Our blue is our original cosine. Oops, that was a solid line. Our red is the sine, and that's dashed. And the green is a solid green line. And the green and the red are the same. So a sine and a cosine are just shifted by -90 degrees. So the moral of the story here, what I want you to walk away from, is when you see a sine, if you want to move it into the phasor domain, you've got to shift it by -90 degrees. So if you're taking a sine and you're moving it to be a cosine, shift by -90 degrees. Okay, or negative pi over 2 radians. That's it. So that's how we deal with our sines. We just turn them into cosines just by scooching them over a little bit. We're going to do that a lot. It's going to come in handy when we do some of these derivations coming up. We're going to get to circuit analysis. I think that's coming up next. Stay tuned and good luck.